The world she once knew was gone. Elira had been born in a quiet valley where the mornings were always peaceful, and the nights filled with the soft light of twin moons. Her people were gentle and kind, living close to nature. They believed in harmony and respect for all living beings. But that world was shattered when war came. The fighting between humans and her kind started far away, yet it spread quickly. Soldiers came to her village one morning, bringing fire and destruction. The air was filled with smoke and the sound of fear echoed everywhere. Families ran, children cried, and homes turned to ashes. Elira tried to protect her younger sister, but they were separated in the chaos. When the noise faded, she was surrounded by strangers who didn't speak her language and didn't care about her tears. They took her along with many others. She didn't know where she was going or what would happen. She was only told to stay silent. Her wrists were tied and her eyes were full of fear. The journey was long, and many who were captured with her didn't survive. When they finally stopped, she found herself in a place she didn't recognize, a large estate owned by powerful humans who saw her people as servants. From that day, her life as Elira ended, and her life as a slave began. Every morning before sunrise, she was forced to wake up and start working. She cleaned rooms, washed clothes, and cooked food she wasn't allowed to eat. The work never stopped. Her hands became rough, her feet cracked, and her back ached from carrying heavy buckets of water. She was often yelled at for small mistakes. If she broke a dish, she would go without food that day. If she looked tired, she would be told she was lazy. Yet Elira never complained. Her heart was strong even when her body was weak. At night, when she lay down in the corner of the servants' quarters, she would stare through the small window at the stars above. Those stars reminded her of home, of the family she once had, of the laughter that used to fill her life. Sometimes she whispered softly, "Someday I'll be free again." Those words were the only comfort she had. The other servants avoided her. They feared punishment if they spoke to her too kindly. Some were humans who had fallen into debt and were forced to work. Others were from her own kind, but had long lost the will to hope. Elira stayed quiet, doing her tasks carefully, trying not to draw attention. The masters didn't care about her name. To them, she was just the alien girl, but Elira remembered her name. She whispered it to herself every morning, as if saying it would help her remember who she truly was. "Elira," she would murmur, touching her chest softly, reminding herself that she was still a person, not just a servant. The days turned into months, and the months into years. She had almost forgotten what freedom felt like. The seasons changed, but her life stayed the same. She had grown thinner, quieter, but her eyes still carried a hidden strength. Those who saw her might not notice, but deep inside she had not surrendered her spirit. Sometimes she saw soldiers come and go from the estate. They would bring news of battles, victories, and losses. She listened silently as they spoke of peace treaties that never lasted, and of hope that always faded. She wondered if the world would ever stop fighting. One cold evening, as the wind howled outside, Elira was cleaning the steps near the main hall. Her hands were numb from the chill, and she could barely hold the broom. Suddenly, she heard loud voices coming from inside, angry arguments between the master and some soldiers. She didn't understand all the words, but she heard something about peacekeeping forces and new orders. She didn't think much of it and continued working. As she swept the last step, she caught her reflection in the water bucket beside her. The face staring back at her was tired and pale. The girl who once smiled under the twin moons now looked like a shadow. But even that reflection couldn't hide the light in her eyes, the small spark that refused to die. That night she sat near the window again, looking at the stars. She thought of her sister. She didn't know if she was alive or not, but she whispered a prayer anyway, hoping the wind would carry it across the distance. The next morning, everything seemed ordinary. The same chores, the same silence. But deep down, Elira felt that something was changing. She didn't know what it was, but she sensed that her life was about to take a different turn. She noticed unfamiliar footsteps that day, firm, steady, and calm. They didn't belong to her masters or the usual soldiers. When she turned her head, she saw a new human standing in the courtyard. He wore a soldier's uniform, but his expression was different. His eyes were not filled with pride or cruelty. They looked thoughtful, almost kind. Elira quickly lowered her head, afraid to make eye contact. She didn't want trouble. Yet she couldn't stop herself from glancing up once more. The soldier was speaking to her master, and from the tone of his voice he seemed firm but respectful. She couldn't understand all of it, but she caught a few words that made her heart beat faster. Words like freedom, orders, and change. That night she couldn't sleep. She didn't know who that man was or why he had come, but for the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. As the wind brushed softly through the small window, Elira closed her eyes and whispered to the stars again, "Maybe tomorrow will be different." She didn't know that the man she had seen, the human soldier named Daniel, would soon change her life forever. She didn't know that he would be the one to give her freedom, to see her not as a servant but as a soul who had suffered too long. For now she only had her quiet dreams and her fragile faith. But sometimes even the smallest hope is enough to light the darkest night. And in Elira's heart that tiny spark began to burn once more, softly, quietly, but unstoppable. Daniel arrived at the estate as part of a new peacekeeping group sent by the government. The long war had ended months ago, but chaos still lingered everywhere. Villages were broken, people were displaced, and many innocent lives were still trapped in unfair servitude. Daniel had seen too much pain in his years as a soldier, too many homes burned, too many lives destroyed. Deep inside, he carried guilt for things he couldn't change. He came to this estate with a quiet purpose, to make sure the new laws of freedom were respected. The war was over, and keeping slaves was now illegal, but not everyone followed those orders. Some powerful families continued to hold captives in secret, pretending the old ways were still alive. Daniel had seen this before, and every time it made him sick. When he first entered the estate, the master welcomed him with fake politeness. The man spoke proudly about his land and his workers, calling them helpers. Daniel watched carefully. He knew how easily cruelty could be hidden behind gentle words. His eyes wandered across the courtyard, and that's when he saw her. Elira. She was sweeping near the stone steps, her movements slow but graceful. Her clothes were worn and her hands were covered in tiny scars. Yet there was something about her that caught Daniel's attention. She looked tired, but her eyes were calm, almost peaceful in a quiet, sad way. He had seen fear, anger, and hopelessness before, but never that kind of quiet strength. He asked the master about her. The man laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that one. She's harmless, been here for years. She's one of those aliens left behind after the war, too simple-minded to survive on her own." Daniel frowned but didn't reply. He didn't like how casually the man spoke, as if Elira was an object instead of a living person. Later that day, Daniel saw her again while inspecting the storage area. She was carrying a heavy basket of firewood, her steps unsteady under the weight. Without thinking, he walked over and said, "Here, let me help you." Elira froze. She had never heard a human soldier speak so gently before. Her first instinct was fear. She lowered her head quickly and shook it. "No," she said quietly. "I can do it." Daniel stepped back, realizing she was scared. "It's all right," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you," but she didn't answer. She kept her eyes down and hurried away. Daniel watched her go, feeling a mix of sadness and anger, not at her, but at the world that had made her so afraid to accept kindness. That night, while Daniel reviewed the estate's documents, he noticed that the master had hidden records about certain workers. Their names were not listed, their pay non-existent. It was clear what was happening here: slavery disguised as labor. And Elira was one of the victims. The next morning, Daniel went outside early. He saw Elira again near the water well, washing clothes. The cold water splashed against her hands, but she didn't flinch. She worked quietly, as if she had learned to live without complaint. Daniel walked closer, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer at first, unsure if it was a trick. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Elira." Daniel smiled softly. "That's a beautiful name." Elira looked up, surprised. No one had said her name with kindness in years. Most people just called her girl or servant. Hearing it spoken that way made her chest tighten. He noticed her expression and added gently, "You don't have to be afraid of me." Still, she didn't speak. She wasn't used to trust, but something in his tone was different, steady, calm, and patient. Over the next few days, Daniel continued to observe quietly. He didn't order her around or question her too much. He just tried to make sure she was treated fairly. When other workers shouted at her or mocked her for being different, he stepped in without anger, simply saying, "Enough. Let her be." Elira noticed this. She began to see that Daniel wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her with disgust or pity. He simply treated her like she mattered. One evening, while the sun was setting, Daniel found her sitting near the garden wall, tired after a long day. He approached slowly and sat on a nearby bench. "You must have seen a lot," he said quietly. "This place. It must not have been easy." She hesitated before nodding slightly. "It was never easy," she replied. "But I learned not to expect anything." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "No one should live like that," he said. She looked at him curiously. "Why do you care? You're human. They say humans don't care about my kind." He met her eyes. "Some don't, but I do. Because I've seen what cruelty does to others and to those who commit it. It destroys everyone." Elira didn't know what to say. His words sounded strange yet honest. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. Hope had betrayed her before. Still, his presence began to change something inside her. She started to feel less invisible. When he was around, she didn't feel like a shadow anymore. Over time, Daniel learned small things about her. She loved looking at the stars because they reminded her of home. She liked the sound of rain because it felt like the sky was speaking gently, and though she rarely smiled, when she did, it was soft and pure, like a light flickering in darkness. One day, when he asked her what freedom meant to her, she paused for a long time before answering. "Freedom," she said quietly. "It means being able to breathe without fear." Those words stayed with Daniel all night. He realized that freedom was not just about laws or orders. It was about restoring dignity to those who had lost it. And he knew he couldn't leave her behind. But helping her wouldn't be easy. The master of the estate was powerful and arrogant. Setting her free would mean going against his authority. Yet Daniel didn't care. He had seen too much wrong to walk away from what was right. From that day on, he made up his mind. He would do whatever it took to free Elira. Not because he pitied her, but because she deserved a life of her own. And even though Elira didn't know it yet, her world was about to change again, this time not through fear, but through courage. In the quiet of that night, as Daniel looked out over the dark fields, he whispered to himself, "No one should live as a prisoner, not while I can still do something about it." Far away in her small room, Elira looked at the stars once more and whispered her nightly prayer of hope. Neither of them knew it, but their paths were already tied together. Two souls from different worlds, both wounded by the same war, both searching for peace. And soon, their stories would become one. The morning sky was pale and silent when Daniel walked toward the main hall of the estate. He had made his decision during the night. He would no longer stay quiet about what was happening here. The law was clear now. No one, human or alien, could be kept in slavery. But some people thought they were above the law. Daniel couldn't watch that anymore. As he entered, the master was sitting comfortably drinking tea with two guards beside him. He looked up and smiled coldly. "Ah, the peacekeeper," he said. "Have you come to see how well I run things?" Daniel stayed calm. "I've come to see why there are still servants here who are not free." The man's smile faded slightly. "They work for food and shelter. Isn't that freedom enough?" Daniel's voice stayed firm. "No, that's control. These people aren't paid and they're not allowed to leave. That's not work, it's slavery." The guard shifted uneasily. The master leaned back, annoyed. "You soldiers think you can change everything. This is how things have always been." Daniel's eyes hardened. Then it's time that changed. He turned and walked out before the man could reply. His heart was beating fast, but his mind was steady. He knew confronting powerful people was risky, yet he couldn't ignore what his conscience told him. Outside, Elira was in the courtyard again, sweeping as always. Her hair moved lightly in the wind and her eyes were fixed on the ground. She looked calm, but inside she lived in quiet fear every day. When she saw Daniel approaching, she stopped her work and stepped aside, unsure of what to do. He noticed the hesitation in her eyes. "Elira," he said softly. "Come with me." She froze. "Why?" "I need to show you something," he said. "Please." "Trust me." Those words, "trust me," were not easy for her to hear. Trust was something she had lost long ago. Still, something in his tone made her follow. He led her to the edge of the property where the old fence met the open fields. The morning light touched the grass with a golden glow. Elira looked at the open land ahead. It looked endless, peaceful, and free. Daniel turned toward her. You don't belong here, Elira. You've been living like a prisoner, but you're not one anymore. The war is over. The law has changed. You have the right to live freely. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Free? She whispered. I don't understand. How? Daniel smiled gently. Because I'm making it happen. I've already spoken to the command center. These people have no legal right to keep anyone here. You're free to go wherever you wish. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. Freedom. She had dreamed of it for so long that it almost didn't feel real. If I go, she said softly, what will happen to them? They'll be angry. Daniel nodded. I'll handle them. That's my job. Before she could respond, the sound of boots echoed behind them. The master and his guards had followed. His face was red with anger. What's going on here? He shouted. You can't just take my workers away. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between the guards and Elira. His voice was calm but sharp. They're not your workers, they're free beings. The war is over. You have no right to keep them. The master laughed harshly. Do you think your words mean anything here? This is my land. I make the rules. Daniel's eyes didn't move. Not anymore. The air was tense. The guards looked unsure. They had followed orders for years, but now they hesitated. Daniel reached into his pocket and held up an official document. These are orders from the new government. Any form of slavery is punishable by law. If you continue this, you'll face serious consequences. The master's expression changed. He looked angry, but there was fear behind his eyes now. He turned sharply toward Elira. You'll regret leaving. You won't survive out there. Elira's hands trembled, but Daniel stood firm. She'll be fine, he said, and she's not alone. The guard stepped back, realizing they could no longer fight against authority. The master muttered under his breath and stormed away. Elira stood frozen. The moment felt too big to believe. The silence after the shouting seemed almost unreal. Daniel turned toward her, his expression softening. It's over, he said quietly. You're free now. Elira looked around, then at him. The fields ahead stretched far into the distance. For the first time, she could walk without permission. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't move right away. Freedom was something she had imagined, but now that it was here, she didn't know how to take the first step. Daniel noticed her hesitation. He smiled gently. Go ahead, he said. The world is waiting for you. Elira took a slow step forward, then another. Each step felt strange, like learning to walk again after years of stillness. She reached the open grass and her knees grew weak. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Daniel walked beside her, watching quietly. She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked at the horizon with eyes full of disbelief. Finally, she whispered, I don't know where to go. Anywhere you want, he said. You don't owe anyone anything anymore. She turned toward him, her voice trembling. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Daniel looked at her for a moment before answering. Because I know what it means to lose everything. I've seen too much pain to walk away from someone who deserves peace. Her eyes softened. She wanted to say something, but words failed her. For years, no one had spoken to her with such honesty. She didn't know how to thank him. As they walked back toward the small outpost near the road, the air felt different. Lighter, quieter, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. The other servants watched from afar, unsure what had happened. Some looked frightened. Others looked hopeful. Daniel stopped and turned to them. You're all free, he said clearly. You can stay here and work for fair pay, or you can leave. No one owns you anymore. For a moment there was silence. Then one by one the servants looked at each other and began to cry softly. Not from sadness, but from relief. Elira watched them, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. For so long she had felt invisible, but now she was part of something bigger, something good. As the sun began to set, she stood beside Daniel at the gate, looking out at the open fields. I never thought this day would come, she said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. Sometimes freedom comes when we least expect it. Elira nodded. Her eyes were still wet, but her face looked peaceful. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. Don't thank me, just live. That's all the thanks I need. They stood there for a long moment, watching the last light of day fade over the hills. For the first time in years, Elira didn't feel trapped. The chains that had once held her were gone, not just from her hands but from her heart. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, one thing was certain. Her life had just begun again. The days after Elira's freedom felt like a dream. Everything around her seemed new, the air, the light, even the sound of the wind. For years she had lived behind walls where every breath belonged to someone else. Now, for the first time, she was breathing for herself. Daniel helped her settle into a small shelter near the edge of a village that had survived the war. The place was quiet, surrounded by tall trees and a river that sang softly through the nights. The villagers were cautious at first. They had never seen someone like Elira before, with her silver eyes and soft voice that carried the accent of another world. But Daniel made sure they treated her with respect. She didn't talk much in the beginning. Freedom felt strange, like a beautiful song she didn't yet know the words to. Every morning she would wake before sunrise and step outside, standing quietly as the first light touched her face. She would whisper something in her old language, a small prayer for peace. Daniel often watched from a distance, not wanting to disturb her. He spent his days helping rebuild damaged homes, fixing bridges and delivering food supplies. Elira started helping too. She had always known hard work, but now it felt different. No one shouted at her. No one controlled her. She worked because she wanted to, and that simple truth gave her strength. Sometimes the villagers asked Daniel about her. Is she really one of them? They whispered. He would nod calmly and say, she's just like us. She's been through more than you can imagine. His words silenced any doubts. In the evenings, they often sat near a fire outside the shelter. Daniel cooked simple meals, bread, soup, sometimes roasted vegetables, and they ate quietly. Elira liked listening to the crackling of fire. It reminded her of the stories her mother used to tell before bedtime. One night, Daniel broke the silence. Do you ever miss your home? Elira looked into the fire. Every day, she said softly. I remember the mountains, the songs, the laughter, but I don't think I'll ever see it again. Daniel nodded slowly. I miss home too, he admitted. Before the war, I had a small house near the ocean. I used to sit by the water and think life would always be peaceful. But then everything changed. Elira turned toward him. You lost people too? He nodded again. Everyone did. For a long moment they said nothing. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of shared pain, the kind that needed no explanation. As days passed, Elira began to open up more. She started to learn the human language properly. Daniel taught her words every evening, writing them in the dirt or on pieces of old paper. She was a quick learner, and sometimes she laughed at her own mistakes. That laughter was rare, but whenever it came, Daniel felt warmth inside him. It was the sound of someone slowly healing. In return, she taught him songs from her world. Her voice was soft and full of emotion. Even though he didn't understand the words, the melody carried a deep sense of longing and hope. One night when she finished singing, Daniel said quietly, That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Elira smiled shyly. It's a song about returning home after a storm, she explained. It says that no matter how long the night lasts, the sun always finds its way back. Daniel looked at her, realizing that she wasn't just talking about the song. She was talking about her life. They began to travel together, visiting nearby villages to deliver food and medicine. Daniel was part of the peacekeeping team, and Elira volunteered to help translate for refugees who didn't speak human language. People started to see her not as a stranger but as a helper, someone who brought calm wherever she went. Children were the first to trust her. They followed her around, curious about her eyes and her gentle voice. She would braid flowers into their hair and tell them small stories about stars that could hear wishes. The adults watched quietly, slowly realizing that kindness needed no race, no origin. One day, while crossing a broken bridge, Elira slipped slightly, and Daniel reached out to steady her. For a brief moment, their hands touched. She froze, not out of fear, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with care. He quickly pulled his hand back, embarrassed. Sorry, he said. I just didn't want you to fall. She shook her head, her voice calm. You don't have to say sorry for kindness. After that, a quiet connection grew between them, unspoken but strong. They didn't talk about it, yet it was there in every shared smile, every gentle look. At night, when Daniel couldn't sleep, he often sat outside looking at the stars. One night he heard Elira's voice behind him. "You look at the sky a lot," she said softly. He nodded. "It helps me think. When I look up, I remember that the world is bigger than our pain." She sat beside him. "That's what my people believe too. We say the stars are the souls of those who never gave up." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're both looking at friends." They sat in silence, the stars reflecting in her silver eyes. The wind was gentle, carrying the sound of distant crickets. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Weeks turned into months. The village slowly returned to life. People built new homes, laughter returned to the streets, and the sound of hammering replaced the echoes of war. Through it all, Daniel and Elira worked side by side. One afternoon, an old woman from the village approached Elira with a basket of fruit. "You've brought peace to this place," she said kindly. "We're lucky you stayed." Elira smiled softly. "I'm the lucky one," she replied. "For the first time, I belong somewhere." Daniel overheard those words, and they stayed in his heart. She had found belonging, not through rescue, but through her own courage to start again. Still, there were days when the past haunted her. Sometimes she woke from dreams where she was trapped again, unable to breathe. On those nights, Daniel would light the fire and sit nearby until she calmed down. He never asked her to talk about it, but his quiet presence was enough. Gradually, Elira began to heal, not just from what had happened, but from what she had believed about herself. She was no longer the frightened girl sweeping steps under orders. She was a woman rebuilding her life, one sunrise at a time. And Daniel, who had once been a soldier burdened by guilt, found peace in helping her. Together they were like two broken pieces that somehow fit perfectly, not because they were the same, but because they understood each other's pain. As winter approached, Daniel built a small cabin near the edge of the river. "It'll be warmer here," he said. "You don't have to stay, but it's yours if you want it." Elira looked at the cabin, her eyes shining. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "Not because I have to, but because I choose to." That choice meant everything. As the snow began to fall outside, the two of them sat by the fire once again. Elira hummed one of her soft songs, and Daniel closed his eyes, listening. The world had taken so much from them both. But in that small room, surrounded by warmth and peace, they had found something the war could never destroy: hope. The snow outside slowly melted as spring came again. The river beside their small cabin began to sing softly, carrying the sound of new life. Flowers bloomed along the banks, and the air smelled fresh and clean. For Elira and Daniel, this season felt like a new beginning, a time to heal completely and move forward. Each morning, Elira woke early and opened the door to let sunlight in. She had learned to cook simple human meals and often surprised Daniel with her efforts. Sometimes the bread was a little too hard or the soup too salty, but Daniel always smiled and said it was perfect. She knew he was being kind, and she appreciated it. His words made her feel valued, something she had never felt before. Their days passed peacefully. Daniel continued his work with the peacekeeping team, while Elira helped teach children how to read and write. The villagers adored her now. They no longer saw her as the alien girl, but as a kind friend who brought light wherever she went. The children would run to her whenever she came near, shouting her name with laughter. She would bend down, smiling, and tell them small stories about the stars, the moon, and her faraway world. In the evenings, she and Daniel often sat outside watching the sunset. The sky would turn golden, then soft pink, and finally deep blue. Elira loved those moments most. "When the sun goes down," she once said, "it feels like the world is telling us to rest and be thankful for the day." Daniel listened quietly, admiring her way of seeing beauty in everything. Over time, a gentle bond grew stronger between them. It was not sudden nor loud, it was quiet, steady, and real. They didn't need to say much. Their hearts understood each other. One evening, Daniel gave her a small wooden pendant he had carved himself. It was shaped like a star. "This is for you," he said softly. "A reminder that you brought light into my life." Elira held it carefully, her silver eyes shimmering. "And you brought peace into mine," she replied. She tied the pendant around her neck, promising never to take it off. That night, as the stars appeared above them, Daniel finally spoke words that had lived in his heart for a long time. "Elira," he said gently, When I first met you, I wanted to protect you. But now, I don't see you as someone who needs saving. I see you as my equal, my friend, my partner. I don't know if humans and your kind have the same ways, but I want to spend my life with you." Elira was quiet for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at him. "In my world," she said slowly, "we believe that souls meet not by chance but by purpose. Maybe this is our purpose, to heal each other." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "Then let's walk that path together," he said. From that day forward, they lived not just as two survivors of war, but as two souls rebuilding life side by side. The villagers celebrated their union in a simple but heartfelt ceremony by the river. They didn't need grand decorations or music. The warmth of people's smiles was enough. Elira wore a white cloth dress made by the village women, and Daniel stood beside her in his old uniform, freshly cleaned and mended. When they exchanged words of promise, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the water behind them. Elira looked at Daniel and whispered, "Wherever life takes us, you are my home." He squeezed her hand gently. "And you are my peace," he replied. After the ceremony, laughter filled the air. The children danced around them, and old villagers told blessings in their native tongue. For the first time in years, the place felt alive again, not with power or fear, but with love and hope. Life after that was calm, yet meaningful. Elira planted a small garden beside their cabin. She grew flowers that reminded her of her home planet, soft blue petals that glowed faintly under the moonlight. Daniel built her a small bench by the river so she could sit there and hum her songs in the evenings. They often talked about the future. "Do you ever want to go back?" Daniel asked once, meaning her lost world. Elira looked at the horizon and shook her head. "Home isn't a place," she said softly. "It's the people who make you feel safe." She smiled at him. "And I've already found mine." Their love wasn't like the kind told in stories. It wasn't full of magic or grand gestures. It was simple and quiet, sharing meals, fixing broken tools, laughing at small mistakes, watching the stars before sleep. But that simplicity made it beautiful. It was love built on kindness, patience, and understanding. One summer night, there was a storm. The wind howled outside and rain poured heavily on the roof. Elira was frightened. It reminded her of the sounds of war. Daniel noticed her unease and gently took her hand. "It's just the rain," he said softly. "It can't hurt us anymore." She nodded and leaned closer, feeling comfort in his voice. When the storm passed, she looked up and said, "The storm didn't take us. We're stronger now." Daniel smiled. "Yes," he said, "because we faced it together." Years went by peacefully. The village grew. The children became young adults, and the world around them healed little by little. Daniel and Elira were known as the couple who never gave up. Two souls from different worlds who taught everyone the meaning of unity. Elira still sang her old songs at night, but now they sounded different. They weren't songs of sorrow anymore, they were songs of gratitude. Daniel would listen quietly, his eyes closed, smiling at the sound of her voice. One evening, as they watched the sunset for what felt like the 100th time, Daniel said, "When I look at you, I don't see the past anymore. I see everything good that came after it." Elira took his hand and replied, "You showed me that kindness can rebuild even a broken heart. That's something I'll carry forever." The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of her garden flowers. The river glimmered under the fading light, just as it had the day they first met. They sat together until the stars appeared, the same stars that had once been her only friends in the dark. Now they shone above her new home, her new life, a life built not from power or fear, but from love that asked for nothing and gave everything. Daniel looked at her one last time before closing his eyes. "You once told me the stars are the souls of those who never gave up," he said. "If that's true, then we'll always shine together." Elira smiled gently, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered, "always." And as the night covered the world, the stars above seemed brighter than ever, two of them shining side by side, watching over the peaceful world they helped create.